So here I'm going to talk about intercorporeality and the ways in which sensorialities are materialized during digital interactions with participants making use of mobile screens. First, let's mention that nowadays social interactions take place within hybrid ecosystems that are both physical and digital and involve multiple communicative media. That's of course related to the digital revolution we're now experiencing, but those practices also emerge from the eternal human desire for ubiquity. As the global situation with the pandemic and the related massive use of video communication has shown us, inter-individual interactions, even when taking place remotely, are a social necessity. In time of physical distancing, digital technologies prevent us from social distancing. However, social interactions are to be regarded as body-to-body experiences by nature. If the locutor thinks and speaks with their body, the interlocutor perceives and interprets with their body as well. Even in the phenomenological approach, it is stated that one's body can't be considered as an object of the world, but has to be seen as a means of communicating with it. Therefore, Merleau-Ponty developed the idea of a corporal schema, referring to the dynamic process through which the subject becomes aware of their body. He defines it as a global awareness of one's posture in the intersensorial world. During social interactions, the corporal schema also translates into an echoization phenomenon. That is the visible or invisible reproduction of the other's physical behavior. A subject's bodily analyzer allows them to understand the other's ongoing experience, to understand how they're feeling while interacting, such as joy, sadness, anxiety, etc. Those affects, sensations, and emotions are visible through multimodality, not only verbal expressions, but also gestures, gaze, mimics, postures. This all leads me to apprehend social interactions as what I call an esthesiological co-experience, meaning a shared experience involving senses and sensations. For a better understanding of the notion of experience, I refer you to Schaeffer's definition, that is a set of interactional processes of cognitive, emotive, and volitive nature that constitute our relationship to the world and to ourselves. And the notion of esthesiology refers to the sensorial nature, sensation, and emotion of one's bodily experience that is enacted through both incorporation and expression. One's body is a place of sensorial coexistence between one another, and it never ceases to appear and expose itself. In an esthesiological understanding of the notion of intersubjectivity, intercorporeality refers to a common world, a shared flesh that includes all bodies and exceeds them as well, a form of general corporality. Sensoriality is a meaning for an individual to become aware of their corporal schema, their relationship to themselves, to the others, and to the sensorial world. It's a form of language allowing the nervous system to communicate with the environment on one part and the human organism on the other part. Its main mission is to keep us alive by connecting the inner world to the outside world. Various bodily receptors convey sensoriality, the exteroceptors, including the well-known 5 senses, the interoceptors in the muscles of the viscera and the nervous system that informs you of your current emotional state, joy, pain, anxiety, and the proprioceptors, bones, muscles that indicates how your body is spatially oriented. Furthermore, one's perception is not a unilateral and homogeneous mechanism of sensorial reception. It is rather a chiasmic mechanism involving multiple projections and interferences with the sensorial system. Perceiving is always an ambivalent, unstable, and paradoxical process. That's what Merleau-Ponty, and Bernard after him, calls sensorial chasms. We can identify 3 main types of sensorial chasms. The intrasensorial chasm refers to the paradoxical and reversible nature of sensation, to the fact of being both active and passive while seeing and being seen, touching and being touched. The intersensorial chasm designates the correspondence in between the senses, for instance, touching with one's eyes, seeing with one's ears. And the parasensorial chasm refers to the articulation between the act of sensing and the act of enunciating. It's the homology between perceiving and saying, a projection into the sensorial world through enunciation. We can also distinguish a metachasm, which is the articulation between all the chasms, the sensorial interplays that enact intercorporeality, the relationship in between all the corporealities. Those sensorial chasms emerge from an Umwelt, that is a sensorial environment specific to a species or to an individual. And we now realize that technical systems ought to be regarded as technoperceptual systems, as they structure our experience of the possible world by creating a specific perceptual Umwelt. Therefore, one's perceptions are structured by the techniques of their time, such as the press, the phones, the internet. And those inventions proceed from the exosomatization phenomenon that has always accompanied human evolution. This process is the pursuit of human evolution not only through somatic organs but through artificial organs as well. A technical exteriorization permitted by the creation of artifacts, tools, instruments, computers. Merleau-Ponty already stated a few decades ago that regarding human beings, it is impossible to overlap a layer of natural behavior over a fabricated cultural world. Everything is both natural and fabricated in human existence. In a neither technophile nor technophore approach, Stigler defines technology as a pharmacon, acting both like a poison and a remedy to that poisoning. Technology artifacts can indeed either enhance or hinder human experience. Therefore, we are focusing here on the effects of technology on sensoriality and the corporeal schema. We are looking to understand how the intersensorial relationship between individual, artifact, and others shapes and is shaped by digital interactions. First, a few words about our research methodology that is actually an interdisciplinary approach. This approach draws on visual ethnography as a particular way of engaging in the fieldwork, multimodal interaction analysis in order to analyze collected data, and phenomenology as a transempirism to better understand intersubjective experience. Visual ethnography, and more generally visual anthropology, proceeds from the belief that culture is manifested through visible symbols situated in constructed and natural environments. Therefore, we observe a shift from word and sentence-based anthropological thought to image and sequence-based anthropological thought. The notion of interaction can be defined as the reciprocal influence of individuals upon one another's actions when in one another's immediate physical presence. And as we mentioned earlier, interactions are multimodal by nature, and they can be plurisemiotic as well, when taking place online in a techno-discursive environment that is composite by nature. Phenomenology consists in a transcendental philosophy that places emphasis on the conditions of possibility of a phenomenon, from the Greek word phyneste, meaning appearing, manifesting oneself. It looks into the meaning that our subjective experience gives to the world. And the phenomenotechnics approach reminds us that any manifestation of the self involves some kind of technology. Let's now focus on our hybrid fieldwork that is actually more precisely described in the introductory video presentation of this symposium. Initially taking place in Lyon, France, this polyartifacted research seminar now involves participants from various geographic areas. In order to involve each of them, we use different digital artifacts meant to facilitate their mobility and autonomy. The participants of these polyartifacted interactions make use of robots such as the Beam and the QB, tablets, computers, mobile webcams, and video projection. It is quite a challenge to adequately and rigorously make the different layers of mediation visually accountable. So visualization is actually part of the research process. The interactional environment can either be represented this way or through a phenomenological approach that aims at representing the subjective experience from an individual standpoint, starting with their body and then the artifacts and software they're using, in order to fully grasp the way they intersubjectively perceive the others. So we realized that this complex and challenging setting was actually worth analyzing, and we decided to turn to a visual study of the interactions involving cameras, microphones, dynamic screen captures, and combine them in order to analyze the embodied and artifacted activities. Let's now look into some sequences in which corporeality and sensorialities are digitally challenged. The first sequence I call the robot sneezes. During a data session, there's an ongoing conversation between Morgan and Jean-François in the conference room in Lyon, and Amélie, who's using the beam robot from her home in Caen, suddenly sneezes.
Oui. Moi, je trouvais que, au contraire, c'était exactement ce que tu nous as montré, c'est-à-dire il ne répond pas à la question, ça peut être perçu comme une absence, mais le fait qu'il cherche sa petite carte pour répondre à la question, il y a un silence. Et donc c'est une absence. Mais ce n'est pas du tout un défaut de pertinence.
In this sequence, Amelie's body is hidden from Christine's sight. For Morgan, the sight anticipates the hearing. One sense projects another sensorial event to come. Amelie's corporality procures Morgan's corporality, an intersensorial pre-trace, a visual surface for the hearing to lay over. But in the absence of this prefiguration, a compensatory mechanism is observed, attributing an organic action to an artifactual schema. The second sequence I call So I Give You a Kiss, Huh? Here it's the end of a group work session. Amélie via Beam, Christelle via Cubi, and Tatiana via Adobe Connect are about to disconnect the video call with the conference room, and Christine decides to get up and give them a kiss.
Bon, alors écoutez,
merci. Oui, attends, en fait, je peux pas faire de copier-coller de Word à Adobe, c'est bizarre, je dois tout réécrire à la main, c'est chiant.
donc je vous fais une bise, hein.
C'est mieux pour la contagion de la grippe.
In this sequence, the participants' bodies are only partially visible in the conference room. The aerial and suspended touch close to the artifacts simulates through Christine's kiss and imaginal proprioception. Christine's corporality procures the other participants' corporalities a metasensorial overtrace, a sensorial marking that extends the interactional limits of the distant corporal schema. This proprioceptive strategy makes the other's corporalities overexist. This final sequence I call She's There, Her Eye. After Susan's conference, Christelle via Adobe and a mobile webcam asks a question. While answering, Suzanne via Beam makes sure that Christelle can hear, but she realizes that she's facing a video projection on the wall.
I've had this experience myself with my Vigo. I drive it around the halls of my office. I don't know if Christelle can hear me. Can you hear me, Christelle? Christelle, est-ce que vous m'entendez?
I can't see you.
Oui,
She cannot
can
see
hear you, but
She cannot see you
because she's there.
she's there.
Right. I'm talking to the screen.
Exactly.
Okay.
In this sequence, Christelle's body is fragmented. The artifacted intrasensoriality splits the sensorial pairs, seeing and being seen, hearing and being heard, in two. The perceptual enunciation enacts an intrasensorial metatrace, a multimodal pointing that brings together the scattered sensorial organs. This enunciative and artifacted materialization makes sense of the reticular corporeal schema. So in conclusion, this data analysis and our approach of intercorporeality led us to identify what we call sensorial traces. A pre-trace, that is a sensorial surface for another sensorial event to come and lay over. An overtrace, a sensorial marking that extends the limits of the perceptible corporeal schema. a metatrace and enunciative pointing that brings together the scattered sensorial organs, and those traces can be linked to the various sensorial chasms. Since technology tends to reticularize sensoriality and intercorporeality online materializes the sensorial organs, becoming aware of one's corporal schema's extension requires them to develop what I call a metasensorial consciousness. Foucault stated about a child's corporal schema, after all, it takes them a long time to know that they have a body. For the first few months, they only have a scattered body, members, cavities, holes, and all of that organizes and is literally embodied only in the mirror reflection. An individual's online bodily experience can be regarded the same way. It's only through their esthesiological co-experiences that individual can develop a metasensorial consciousness, making sense of digital intercorporeality. Developing a metasensorial consciousness when interacting online prevents from any decorporalization phenomenon, and the metasensorial consciousness enacts an imaginal world, an interworld in between the sensible one and the intelligible one.